All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful Saturday morning. Happy to be with you, and it's great to see such a good turnout. I want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. I see you've helped yourself to coffee and pastries. Please feel free to get up at any time and for more coffee if you want to. Restrooms are located through those doors over there. And also a reminder that if you're not on our email list or following us on Engage Carrboro, there's a sign-up sheet there. We really encourage you to take advantage of all the methods that we can communicate with you so we can keep you up to date. The purpose for today is a Q&A session for the public to receive the site assessment reports that were presented to the Town Council in June. Council had their chance to receive the information and ask some questions, and we wanted to make sure that the public had the same opportunity. So that is the focus of this meeting. We are on a little bit of a time crunch. We do have a hard stop at 10:45, but I think we could stretch it a little bit to 11 is what I've heard, since we're getting a late start. I'd ask that you hold all of your questions until, yes?
I did not hear what your name was and what your role was.
Anne-Marie Vandeman. I'm the housing director for the Town of Carrboro. So hold your questions until the presentation is over, and then what we'll do, if you raise your hand in the audience, I can bring this microphone to you so you can be heard. And I think with that, I will turn it over to William Wirt of Summit Design and Engineering Services.
Thank you. Like Anne-Marie said, my name is William Wirt. I am an engineer with Summit Design and Engineering Services in Hillsboro, in our main office there. I'm going to stand on this side so I can get to the computer. Sorry for the delay. As you probably saw, I left my computer in the car, but even after the hard stop, if y'all have more questions, I'm happy to answer them outside. So I'll go quickly through the presentation so we can get to questions without trying to take up too much time, but still giving a comprehensive overview of the report. And this is the same presentation that I gave to the City Council back in the summer, or the Town Council, excuse me. And I believe I began at about 11 o'clock, so many of you probably weren't there to see it. So the project scope included analyzing existing conditions of both sites, including a tree survey. It included a geotechnical report, which evaluated all of the existing soils, the depth of rock, and provided typical pavement designs for roads and any development that would need to be built on this site, as well as foundations, subgrade, and fill placement. We then had environmental reports for both sites. These were phase 1 environmental site assessments, and these are a comprehensive overview of any environmental restrictions that would prevent development of the site. They included, the environmental reports also included a wetlands and stream delineation and protected species analysis as well. Then the last thing was a preliminary stormwater impact analysis, and that analyzed basic site and stormwater development and management practices, as well as stormwater control measures. Those are exactly what they sound like. They control stormwater. They might be ponds, might be ground alteration for increased infiltration, and then low impact development recommendations as well, which are pulled from a lot of state guidance and regulation out of the NCDEQ MDC, which is the minimum design criteria. So the subject sites, as you all probably know, is Pathway Drive, which is outlined there, and Crest Street, outlined here. And then beginning with the surveys, and beginning with Pathway Drive, The topography basically throughout the whole site, even across the road, pathway drive there, basically all drains to the creek that is in the planned south portion of the site. And the stream flows eastward, and the slope across the site is about 11% on average. On crest, again, all flows towards the stream. Stream flows northeast, and that slope's a little steeper at 12%. But both sites are obviously challenged with topography. And then there are buffers and easements and encroachment listed on the surveys. You might notice on the surveys that the buffers on many of the streams are different than what was called out in the environmental report. And that's because those are the buffers that are on file with Carrboro GIS at this time. If this site was to be developed, or now that it has been analyzed, those buffers can be added to the project, and any development happening there would be restricted by the regulations of those buffers. Some can be built on, some cannot.
Can you clarify those buffers? Is that 30 feet in total or 30 feet each side of the creek?
Some, it depends on.
Could you give her the mic
Oh,
so
I'm
we
sorry.
can capture?
Are we
her
waiting
question?
Well, I think the picture is beneficial so that we can see it.
If y'all can wait till the end, I'll just go.
I think it's helpful to see the picture though.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm sorry, will we get copies of these slides?
You can, I believe. They're technically town property. But so you see the buffer here. If you see the line hatch on the outside, ignore the yellow, that was to call out an easement. And then there's a darker hatched easement. So it depends on what type of stream it is. But for perennial streams, for the big ones that have water flowing all the time, those buffers are 50 feet. And you have a 20-foot section of buffer and a 30-foot section of buffer in state regulations or town regulations, which are sometimes more restrictive, defines what can be built in those buffers. Which are
And that's water included or beyond water?
It's from the edge of the creek. Edge of the creek out.
So 20 feet, creek, 30 feet. So
No,
both sides.
it's creek, 20 feet, 30 feet. So
Yeah.
50 feet from the top of bank.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's all.
Pathway Drive, there are some encroachments on the property. Those are called out in red, fences or sheds. There's a sewer easement, that's what's highlighted in yellow there. And then the sewer easement continues down through, it crosses the stream and continues into the neighborhood there. And then Crest Street, I believe that is an easement. 30-foot combined water and sewer easement. And then the tree survey included counts of all the large trees, large caliber trees. Those are typically over 12 inches in diameter. Crest Street was also included a tree survey which had far fewer trees of that kind, being that it's smaller in size. And then moving on to the geotechnical summary. This site and this part of North Carolina is in a geological location in the state that's called the Slate Belt, which basically means that you have a lot of volcanic igneous rock, which essentially means any rock you have is really hard to bust up. So you don't have, like, weathered rock is has been encountered. That's rock that's shifting towards the surface, it's wearing out. And then bedrock was encountered in 3 borings as well. Those were a bit deeper. Excuse me. And the geotech report stated that the site is suitable for development from a geotechnical standpoint, meaning that all of the subgrade and all of the existing soil is suitable for building on. You have good soil there because you got a lot of rock, which creates stable base for foundations and things like that, which include shallow foundations, spread footings, kind of like a slab on grade house, or excuse me, that's monolithic slabs. Spread footings are more like what you would find underneath your house if you are in a crawl space and and your house is set on piers. The rest of it is just basically engineering recommendation for the contractors and for the owners when they come in to build the site, and for engineers as they design the foundation systems, as well as any buildings that are on site as well. So, moving on to the environmental report. The Phase 1 ESA, which is the huge document in the report, probably took up most of it, just does what I mentioned earlier. It investigates both sites, all historical records, to see if there's anything from an environmental standpoint that is restrictive to development on the site. Restrictive meaning that that it would prevent you from building because of the nature, something as serious as an oil spill, or something as minor as outstanding permits and other items that might need to be cleaned up. It identifies things like hazardous substance, like I mentioned, mainly petroleum products. And in neither report on either site were any recognized environmental conditions present that were particularly restrictive. You also had the wetland and stream delineation for both sites. This one is for Pathway Drive. This is updated from recent site visits done back in the spring. This is the report that the new stream buffers would be based on. It identifies streams as both perennial, which are the big ones with water flowing all the time, and ephemeral, which are mostly ditches and only full when it rains or after. You can see on Crest Street, that's ate up with natural buffers from both the perennial stream, the ephemeral stream, and then also in the top corner there in the orange is a wetland, which has the same buffer restrictions as the streams do. For each site, endangered species study was done. And this doesn't mean that there is an endangered species on site. It means that the signs and conditions are such that there could be. And if they are identified, then development might be restricted to certain time frames, things like migration, when animals, particularly for the tricolored bat, for example, is not roosting there. And then the SIA summary is the stormwater impact analysis. So for both sites, we did basic stormwater analysis for pre and post-development runoff, and we made some assumptions about post-development because we do not have and did not produce a conceptual plan. We simply took the regulations from the Town of Carrboro as far as maximum development and the state as far as maximum development, and made conservative assumptions on impervious cover conditions, as well as tried to look forward and be a little more realistic on what could actually be built there. All of the analysis was done for the 25-year storm, which is the largest storm that the Town of Carrboro requires you to reduce between pre and post conditions.
I have a question about that. The stormwater 25-year plan. When was the last time the analysis of the 25-year plan was updated, given the current change in the climate change?
The data, all the rainfall data pulled from the 25-year storm is pulled from NOAA rainfall data. So however often they are updating their rainfall data is how accurate our analysis is. Now, as far as defining what As far as like what defines a 25-year storm, that's done on a much more inconsistent analysis, much more inconsistent basis.
So, have you been into Spring Valley and the Spring Valley Stormwater Retention Pond this year to see what the stormwater from Helene did, as well as from 3 other rain events this year in Spring Valley, and all the water coming off of this development are doing to Spring Valley? I'm done. I have that question.
Do you need to report it?
Well, we just won't hear it. Yeah,
Okay.
they're on the video.
Yeah,
It's
so
the report, I've seen it, what it talks about stormwater retention, and it's wholly inadequate to the water that's going to be coming in off of that hill.
We can hear.
Can I answer that at the end?
Folks who can't
Please,
be here
I just
today,
say,
so that's why
what's your
we'd
time?
like you to
I
speak
understand.
into a microphone.
All right, so all of the buildable area and the buffers are defined on each of the stormwater drainage area maps, which is what these 2 slides are, or excuse me, this slide. Your basic values for calculating your pre and post runoff are provided here. These include things like total area, your cover condition, which is what we assign based on what is present on site or what is planned in development. And then we come up with runoff values for each storm from 1 to the 25-year, as well as runoff volumes generated from those storms. And these are pre-development flows here shown in the report. So these are the flows and the volumes, if you were doing low impact development, that you would have to match in the post-development condition. So the idea is in North Carolina that for the defined storm, there is no additional runoff coming from leaving this site versus what was there before. And then stormwater management requirements. For Crest Street, largely the same idea, and for time I will skip through these. And then treatment requirements as well. You don't only have to retain the runoff, you have to treat it to get certain nutrients, particularly nitrogen, phosphorus, suspended solids to certain percentages in the flow that is leaving the site in the post-development condition. And then stormwater control measures. I won't go into this too much right now because this is mostly for when development rolls forward, which kind of stormwater control measure would be best for retention and treatment. These include wet ponds, bioretention cells, underground storage, which is what it sounds like, large underground chambers that retain stormwater and control it. Then permeable pavers, which is something that could be put in parking lots. That's something that can increase permeability of the soil, or excuse me, of the cover condition rather than just having an asphalt parking lot. You develop a system that allows a lot of infiltration. And then low impact development, that includes the runoff volume match. It includes things like relaxing setbacks so that you don't have so much dense impervious, other things like that. Rainwater harvesting. And then just the last thing that I'll point out here is there's no concept plan that was developed or provided for this work. We just used the restrictions defined in the authorities who have the jurisdiction to make those restrictions. We just found conservative estimates for each site. And all stormwater requirements will have to meet the Town of Carrboro's land development or land use ordinance, and then anything out of the state's manual, the MDC, the minimum design criteria, that would need to be adhered to as well. Since this is Carrboro's owned land, Carrboro might not be able to review it. It might have to go up to the state. So both regulations were considered in this analysis.
What is AHJ?
Sorry?
What is the second line? What is AHJ?
Okay, so her question was, what was AHJ? That is authority having jurisdiction. That means like in the town limits right here, Carrboro has jurisdiction. The state does not have jurisdiction, except for public projects. Oftentimes, the local municipality is not allowed to review it, so it has to go to the state. Yes, ma'am.
You've been talking about the buffers. You've been talking about the buffer requirements, but you left out all mention of floodplains, which the floodplain is bigger than the buffers. So I'd like you to address that. I'd also like to let you know that stormwater, the town is now looking at 50 and 100-year stormwater retention. So your numbers may need to be updated.
Absolutely. I mean, to the second point first, whatever the town requires a developer to do, that's what they're going to be held to do. So if they put into law, if they put into their land use ordinance that you have to retain the 100-year storm, then the design provided and the development constructed is going to have to do that. As far as the floodplains, I have all of the hard copies of the reports if anyone would like to come up and see them. I'm flipping now to the FEMA floodplain map. So there is no defined FEMA floodplain, meaning no publicly mapped floodplain on these properties. However, the site could be subject to private floodplain analysis, which is essentially the same practice as a FEMA report or a FEMA flood study mapping. It just doesn't go to FEMA. So it's not mapped by the federal government. It would just be mapped specific to each development, and then the restrictions of the floodplain could be defined in the TRC process, the Technical Review Committee process, and lots of times those restrictions include minimum foundation elevation versus floodplain base surface elevation.
Can you talk a little bit more about the geological challenges presented that you mentioned at the town council meeting, such as blasting and removing bedrock and backfilling and the challenges with the backfilling due to the slope? I believe you went into great detail at the town meeting.
Yes, ma'am. So the site would require quite a bit of extensive geotechnical filling and design to be able to develop on because of the slope and because of the rock. As far as removing rock, that would be difficult to predict at this time. They ran into bedrock, they ran into weathered rock, but whether or not blasting is allowed would be determined at the time of inspection or during the TRC review process. Again, it would be defined at that point.
We're going to switch places so I can bring the microphones to you. You were next.
Thank you. Diane Robertson. I live in Spring Valley and I've lived there for 32 years. I think the thing that concerns me the most is that the reality of what people see who live there is not really consistent with this technical presentation. We know that the development that has taken place upstream, Spring Valley is one of the lowest points in the county, right? If you come from Hillsborough down, has already impacted the houses that are there and the retention pond that was built for 100 houses. Much more development has taken place since that development was created, and the town is not capable of dealing with the stormwater issues that they currently have. I think it's a pretty simple concept that if you harden a surface, if you remove the absorptive materials like trees and plants and soil, you're going to have more stormwater. It's going to create more of a problem. And your plan, which was presented at the council, was to clear cut. That was the easiest and the best way to develop, was to clear cut. So you're removing all of the absorptive material, you're hardening it with construction roads, whether they're permeable pavers or not. And I think that, this is overstating what the reality is of that particular property. The reason it was not developed in the first place is because the development costs were too high to develop anything that would be affordable. So I just think that we're asking the wrong question. It is not that I can speak for myself. I'm not against affordable housing. This is not a NIMBY thing. This is the wrong project in the wrong place. And that is really where the conversation should start.
Hi. So, as I read the report, and I'd like to know if this is correct. The report says, recommends to go in and clear cut, and then only after clear cutting would be able to say whether this is a buildable site or not. So, the question is, first of all, is that correct? That the idea is you clear cut first and then say whether we could build? And then secondly, what would be the determining factors once you clear cut to say whether it's buildable or not?
Well, the clear cutting is only in relation to mass grading. So if it depends on how the town decides to use it. If they want to use the whole site and they want to use material on site, then the true or the comprehensive analysis of the soil underneath would be revealed then, meaning like if you can use the on-site soil to build on top of, or if you have to import. As far as clear cutting goes, that just depends on what type of development it ends up being. The clear cutting is recommended for high density development, high urbanized development. Lower impact development would require far less impervious surface on the site. I believe the number is less than 6% for low impact development. So the clear cutting strictly depends on what kind of development is chosen for the site.
But the report did say that the clear cutting, so is this a high density development?
Let's get you on mic. The idea is to build as many as possible. Some of your council members said they'd like to see 45 units on there. They're on tape saying that.
The report analyzes the most conservative assumptions across possible development, buildable area, and your land use ordinance. But no development specifically has been selected yet.
I just want to address the stormwater issue. I think our town has a really big affordability issue, but as big or bigger is stormwater. And I know you started to address it. I know Diane addressed it. What is interesting to me, and I really want to address this to the town more than to the engineering people, this town has serious stormwater issues with almost every development in Carrboro. And we just won, my neighborhood, along with the town and several other nonprofit agencies, an award for having to address those stormwater issues. And I will say the amount of money it took is huge. And we're 27 houses. And yet we are correcting what happened when both the town and the developer put in our neighborhood. And we got grants to do it. There are dollars trying to address a pipe that the neighborhood put in and the town allowed them to get rid of soil buildup. The problem here is that the town is not successfully addressing stormwater issues before developments are approved and built. This to the citizens, and a disservice actually to anyone who invests in those properties, whether it's the town or whether it's people who buy the properties. And what's obvious to me that's also really interesting, I want to address this to the town, is that we're in the midst of rewriting our land use ordinance. That includes how the funding, I think ours is only 25 years for huge rains or whatever, instead of 50 or 100, Chapel Hill has 100. Why are we even considering this in the midst of the revision of the land use thing? But until I'm not going to argue with what you put forward in terms of stormwater remediation, but why would we do that? I mean, that is like, why would we have to treat stormwater to the nth degree because we're developing inappropriately? Anyway, that's
I just didn't know what you meant when you used the word conservative a number of times in terms of that this was all done based on conservative. Does that mean a fewer number of houses being planned? I just don't know what that term is meaning.
It means if the regulation states that you can only have a maximum of 24% impervious on your site, then we assume 24%. If there wasn't, if there wasn't a stipulation, then we used the restrictive features of the site to define an impervious area. But I think on both of these properties, obviously being in the town of Carrboro, 24% was the maximum, and that's what we used. So that's what I mean as far as conservative, and that goes across all preliminary analysis.
So that means the minimum criteria is being met?
Well, it means that the most severe post-development conditions were the ones that were analyzed if the site was built out.
But still based on not the full number of years that, say, Chapel Hill is doing.
Full number of years?
Yeah, when you're looking at the drainage and the water and all that, we're still going by 25-year
Yes, ma'am.
data, not what other videos are doing.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, you might have one additional question. Has anything been looked at in terms of the slope with consideration of ADA requirements for people with physical disabilities?
Well, that would be covered during conceptual design and then during design, all of which would have to go through review with the town, and they would be held to all ADA standards. So they would have to meet the ADA standard for any type of development, regardless of what it ends up being.
Even in terms of transportation?
Yes, ma'am.
I could probably speak loud. I just wanted to ask you to reiterate a point that you made during the council presentation. Just wanted to ask you if this would be an expensive place to build.
Yeah, based on, I believe the question came up regarding the expensive building. But I did say that from any traditional engineering practice, site engineering practice, that yeah, it would likely be very expensive to build.
So how affordable can it be?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, I think we do.
So, going back to stormwater retention. So presently, the report does not address any impact that this property development would have on the Spring Valley stormwater retention pond. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Has anybody from Summit been into Spring Valley after a heavy rainfall event?
I have not. I do not know. I have not.
So I was down at our stormwater retention pond 30 minutes after the rain ended with Tropical Storm Helene. The standpipe in that pond was 6 inches underwater. The standpipe. The only thing that saved an overtopping event with Helene was the rain stopped at that point. If that had been a more direct, if the storm had been further east, you may have had an overtopping event with Helene due to all the existing water, and this development is only going to exacerbate that. It's not going to reduce it at all. So unless you're building huge stormwater retention ponds on site, on property for these, and I don't see those in the report either. I don't see any ponds. I hear concepts of using ponds, but I don't see any layouts of ponds in the report. Doesn't that need to be incorporated, and don't you need to be incorporating the impact on the Spring Valley stormwater retention pond?
Well, for the Spring Valley stormwater retention pond, that would be downstream of the site. So that would be up to the town to study whether or not they would like that done.
But you're having an impact on that pond.
Well, if the site is developed, it would have an impact, yes, sir. But that's what the regulation is in place for the 25-year storm. And that's why we define pre-development flows, is because they have to match the pre-development flows of the site now in post-development conditions up to the 25-year storm. Now for Helene, it's obviously a much bigger storm than 25 years. So that's why you saw the standpipe six feet underwater. Or 6 inches, I can't remember.
It's not bigger than a 25-year flood. I'm sorry, it's not.
Helene
Yes.
wasn't?
No.
Well, it just depends on the time of concentration in your drainage area as well.
We've had 2 separate sewage events because of flooding this year alone, right below the dam in Spring Valley. This year, 2.
I remember you mentioned that at the town. And then your other point, I believe you had another question, which I'm forgetting.
So are you going to be incorporating Spring Valley into the study, that stormwater retention pond?
The only thing, actually, I should say, I don't know. That would be up to the town when it comes time to develop it.
I have a question related to that pond also. You mentioned that the surface topography is 16% and that it flows in the northeast direction. The northeast direction is the perennial stream that flows. And you have the nearest surface water in the vicinity of the subject property is an unnamed pond, 260 feet from the property. Bowling Creek is mentioned running along the subject property, 800 feet to the northeast. Why does your report not disclose the location of the unnamed pond as being in the Spring Valley neighborhood surrounded by Waterside Drive? And there's no mention of a dam with this pond either in your report. So if anyone was to read your report, they would not know what this unnamed pond is.
I believe the unnamed pond is it upstream, did you say? Or
No, it is 260 feet northeast of the property,
Right.
which is exactly where the water flows in your report.
Right. So the report is restricted to the properties only, nothing off-site. And
So
no
what-
downstream analysis was done.
Can you ask, I'm going to ask one more question. You have on your pictures drainage divide. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Certainly. So the existing topography now divides the drainage areas on site based on certain high points and certain low points. And so what we do is we define those sub-drainage areas based on that topography, and we split out the flows coming from there so that we can measure things such as time of concentration, meaning how long it takes flow to get down to the bottom. And then from there, we may recombine them where all of the flow leaves the site, which is at both of those creeks, at obviously the lower side property line. And that's the value that is the runoff value that we use as the target to match in post-development up to the 25-year storm.
And that drainage divide is between the property and Spring Valley neighborhood that I mentioned. And so the drainage divide, if you're talking runoff, it's going to run towards that neighborhood or it's going to run towards the Waverly Forest neighborhood?
It would, that would be determined at the time of development, at the time of design. Right now, I know that typically, if you have a stream leaving the site at a lower elevation, you want to target that location. And then as far as drainage areas, we took our drainage areas off-site with topography, but we started at the low end of the stream on the property as our starting point, and then we drew the areas from there.
I have a question as well. I can recall we had some issues about the easements for streams being reduced, was this prior to this report or after this report? Does this currently reflect the current standard or what was in place prior to this report?
The easements or the buffers?
The buffer, excuse me,
The
buffers.
buffer. So the buffers now, the buffers that are determined in this report are the most up-to-date buffer lines there are. And I believe that they're mostly larger than what's currently on file. So development plans would have to be updated with each buffer.
Does the Department of Water Quality ever become involved in this project at some point?
The DEQ?
Yes.
They will if it has to go, if this development and the design of this development has to go to the state to get reviewed.
And the state rules, the local government has to follow the Department of Water Quality rules, is that correct?
They can define their own.
Thank you for giving me the mic again. So I do recall from your presentation, first of all, there are a lot more people here hearing this for the first time than were at the previous presentation, which was more developed. I think you said, or your company said, that the options for retention on the site would be retention ponds, think Spring Valley retention ponds, or underground sequestration tanks. Cheaper ponds, but less land surface to build on. More expensive, underground sequestered, more density. Either of these things is problematic in terms of impact downstream or cost back to the affordability issue. I think we should keep thinking about affordability. However, the Spring Valley Pond, which I lived on for 32 years, has become more impacted by upstream development, and one of the reasons it overflowed is that the pond is now higher. The silt and the impact from upstream development has come over the 40 years that subdivision has been there. And again, it was built in a silo. The key word you said was, we only looked at this site. We don't look at how this site impacts other sites, which may be a problem that we have in our country, the way we develop in general. But now we have a problem of knowing that we have increased severe storms more and more and more frequently. Have we forgotten last summer when cars were being run off of Umstead Road because of the water coming across Umstead at the same time that the concrete asphalt in Vermont was being lifted by, oh yeah, and there was that storm in Asheville a few weeks ago. I mean, you know, the real world is that things are happening outside of the site, and I don't mean to, you know, you're the messenger, I'm sorry to be beating up on you, but things are happening outside the site that we all are aware are going to impact other places, and we're just trying to get the town to be proactive and not make the mistakes they made in the past. Cautionary tale, Spring Valley has a dam that it has to rebuild at its own cost because the town agreed to allow houses to be built on the backside of the dam. That should never have been done. The developer went to the town, I'm sorry there's no one here from the planning department, and said, I want to build 5 houses down here. So they said, sure, go ahead. They wanted to build Waverly Forest. Oh, sure, go ahead. Because you have this conservation area that's going to protect you from all the downstream water that's going to come. No, that isn't the conversation they had. So if we don't feel, it doesn't sound like I trust the town to act in my best interest, you would be correct, because the evidence is to the contrary. These decisions being made in a silo and ideological, we have to have affordable housing. Where can we build it? Oh, well, let's just build it here. Without the other implications, it's not good governance, and it doesn't build trust in the community.
Hi, I was wondering if you could just clarify the map where you say buildable land, you know, where you have both sites and it's kind of a red.
Sure.
Is that updated to reflect the stream buffers that you updated, or is it the old version?
Let me see here.
I hope that makes sense.
It did.
Yes, that. So is that still the same buildable land with the updated stream buffers?
Yes, it would be.
Okay, thank you.
So the all that's red, pink is the buildable?
Correct. Now, whether it's actually buildable, like full-blown design would have to analyze that and determine it finally. But as far as like you may develop here, that is generally the area.
So how many acres?
I don't know off the top of my head. I have the reports up here if you'd like to see.
So just what goes into determining buildable?
The report says 3 acres of buildable property.
3.1.
3.1.
That's more than that.
It's multiple parcels.
Okay.
It's individual parcels, but it adds up to all 3 acres.
Right. So then once you get into full design, that's only then would you know the actual extent. But again, 3 acres or 3.1 acres, that is the conservative estimate, being the most extreme. Yes, sir.
And this area to the,
I'm sorry, do you need my?
We have a mic.
I'm speaking for my neighbor, Matt Hitt, who couldn't be here today. And this goes to the thread of not analyzing beyond the site itself. He describes, he lives right at Crest Street in the middle of the town-owned property, between the two arms of the town-owned property. He describes the stormwater as it goes under Estes Park Apartments, out by the railroad tracks to Village Drive and so on. And he said he has seen rain cause the occurrence of a large pond that takes several hours to drain to the east of the site. And he wants to know if the FEMA flood maps are considered, and in particular, for this particular drainage capacity, and was it inspected as part of the assessment? And I'm speaking for Matt in the sense that a lot is happening to the east of the actual site.
So as far as the FEMA floodplain maps, when we looked, we did not locate any public floodplains. If we're mistaken and he has some on file, he's welcome to send them to me. I can give you my information. But as far as the pond to the east, impacts of development off-site were not considered in this report.
Hey, thank you for being here. I had a follow-up question about the buildable area map for Pathway. I was wondering if you could provide more detail on what is and isn't considered in determining how area is designated as buildable on that map. And I guess specifically what I was confused by was it appeared that the buildable area crossed some of the perennial and ephemeral markers. And so I guess, layperson, I had assumed that there would need to be a buffer reflected in the buildable area. So yeah, thanks for any guidance you can provide.
Any impact to the buffers, first of all, would have to be regulated. Whether they can be, the ephemeral ones are only 15 feet each side. Whether or not those can be completely obliterated would be up to the town. At the time of this analysis, it looked like the regulations that the town provided was that ephemeral impacts from development were allowed in ephemeral buffers. Then you can see us getting down into the yellow shaded area, which might be hard to see, but that's the outer stream. That's the outer stream buffer, which certain uses are allowed to be built in there, such as slopes or multi-use paths and things like that. And then I'll say also, we considered easements and setbacks as well. Some of those might be conditional based on how the plan gets approved, and some are written in stone now, such as the sewer easement there.
I'm going to jump in just for a minute because we had some questions that were sent in by people who couldn't be here, and they're touching on topics that I don't think has been spoken about this morning. First one is the report states that the tricolored bat is proposed in danger. What is the impact on the proposed development if the species is endangered?
Well, it depends on, and I'm not the expert on the endangered species, but it depends. Excuse me. Development would be restricted based off the regulations in place to protect that species. For example, this isn't necessarily the case, but it could be. If tricolored bats are found to be on site when construction is due to start, then construction can't start until they migrate off site. Or like typically, maybe it's not migration, maybe it's roosting. And roosting happens from January to May, so you can't build between those months, or you cannot start construction, between those months. You have to wait until after those months. So that's just a hypothetical of a restriction that could be in place there.
Well, gentrification for the bats, they don't have anywhere to live at.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Jane Danielewicz, and I live in Waverly Forest. One thing I just want to talk about the map that's up here. I think, have you been to the site yourself?
I have.
Okay, so if you haven't been to the site, it's difficult to look. That map looks like it's flat, and, and that is definitely not what's going on. So if you could talk about, like you did a tree survey, and so it seems to me like why? Well, what is the impact? So this building design, if I'm not mistaken, would be that you would come in and that whole buildable area in pink would be clear cut.
No, not necessarily.
Okay. Well, can you explain to me about the site preparation for removing all vegetation?
Well, the site would go into design, and the limits of disturbance to build the site would be defined. And at that point, if there are any, for example, the trees, the hardwood tree survey, any trees within there would be removed. That's where the clear cutting would likely happen. Anything out of there, anything outside of that would be protected from clear cutting. So it depends on the final design. And then the topography is shown on this map, so it does show the giant slope.
Yeah, but it doesn't, when you look at it, the impression is that it's flat. So it's just difficult in the imagination.
Right.
I'm not saying the map is inaccurate, but a cross-sectional map would show the slope. But the whole parcel is forested?
It is wooded.
Is wooded, yes. And these trees are between some of them, there are 310 that are between 100 and 200 years old. And they are spread throughout the entire site. So you would be removing not only the trees, but all vegetation.
And the carbon
And then there would be
sequestration.
infill. So can you just describe the process? Like, why would there need to be infill? And how would the houses below the slope, along Waverly Forest, or along the slope on either side, be affected by the infill? Can you just describe the topography or how that would work?
For sure. So let me back to the trees real quick though. The ones that would be taken down would be defined by the limits of disturbance, like I said, and then any regulation for like tree replacement would have to happen as well. And then again, like it's the final design that defines like what is allowed to be clear cut. And then as far as like infill, you mean grading like mass?
Right. The report says that after removing all vegetation, then there would be, in terms of the site preparation, there would be infill. There would be to level the site.
Correct, yes.
Can you just explain that whole process? First, there would be you would clear cut all that and remove all vegetation. Then what would happen?
Then you would
The dump trucks come.
You would bring in additional fill to level it out, or you could, because it's so steep, you could step it down with foundation walls, and all of that grading to get the final design in would be done at that time. And that's defined way down the line from here. It is not defined here.
Right,
But outside of what would be required to get it done.
So if you look at Waverly Forest, so it's an 11 the slope, I can't remember what the slope was, 11% or something like that.
87 feet.
Yeah, 87 feet. So how would you level, quote, level that, given that the houses below that are continuing down? So do you see Waverly Forest Lane?
Yes.
That is in the floodplain. Waverly Forest Lane, the street, is actually built in the floodplain.
Right.
Should never been there.
Yeah, it should never, we should, our neighborhood should never been approved. And I'm sorry, Spring Valley, because our neighborhood floods your neighborhood.
Our neighborhood probably should never been approved.
Right. So what would the back, okay, that pink area, there's all the way up to the property lines of those houses on Waverly Forest. All the way up to the property line. And that property, there are those 100-year trees up against the property line all along there. So those would all be removed.
Not necessarily. It depends on the final number. But again, what's shown here is the most conservative things that would likely happen.
Okay, all right, sorry, I'm just overtaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Hold on, let's get to
So we are getting kind of close to time. I want to make sure that everyone who hasn't had a chance to speak has that chance. So right over here.
I just want to make one comment. The next town council meeting is November 19th, Tuesday at 6 p.m. This is a new time. They will be taking public comments. And I just want to encourage everyone who spoke today or who hasn't spoke that to come to the town council meetings. This is our forum as citizens to let our opinion and concerns known to the town council. It will be recorded and on record. You can also email the town council. And also online is the presentation that Summit gave in June. You can watch that tape. It goes into much more detail than what was shown today. And the report, the full summer report, is also online. And you don't have to be an engineer to understand it. A lot of it is just common sense. And if you can't make the town council meeting on November 19th, there will be more in 2025, but this is the last one for this year. And I cannot stress how important it is for citizens to show up at this meeting and express your concerns.
I'd like to thank the town for having this meeting, although I'll also make a comment that it was incredibly brief amount of time for the, and I don't want to ask why, but it does seem like there wasn't enough time to cover everything and everybody's questions. One thing I do feel is lacking is a similar meeting where we can just talk as citizens about the wisdom of doing this project and talk to the town about the kind of analysis, cost benefits they've done to show that this actually makes financial sense. Perhaps it's cheap advice. And I'll just finish up with, if you look at the plan produced for affordable housing public comment, the public comment phase in that plan comes after site design. There's no provision for public comment prior to even deciding on a site design. So I would ask the town to be generous as they were here and provide the same kind of forum for us to discuss the wisdom of this. You see the interest that you've generated. Thank you.
I understand that you're an engineer and your job is to take this project that the town has asked you to do and tell them how and if they engineering systems that you work with. But what kind of a report or review would be required to say, in the general, is this a good choice of a site to build? Is this an affordable site? What would the town have asked for differently if they wanted to see the big picture?
They would likely, any developer interested in doing it and making their own decision about whether or not it's good to develop on, that isn't that isn't a determination that we make. It's ultimately up to the developer. But they would likely have to have a concept plan in front of them that would go into a fair amount of design, but yet still preliminary, such as grading and things like that, so that they can perform a cost analysis, cost-benefit analysis, and decide whether or not they want to do it. And once the concept plan is made, they can easily calculate cost.
And so what you've done here is provide them with the technical detail they need to come up with a concept plan.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Hi, I've lived in Carrboro for 30-some years. I am a recipient of affordable housing. I've been in my house for 27 years. I was able to get that house because of Empowerment Incorporated. Affordable housing groups are, over the last many years, have had to go to rentals. I know Empowerment does not do new homes anymore because it got too expensive. Building affordable housing is expensive. To say that you don't do it because it is expensive is denying a whole bunch of people opportunities to live here. If you want a non-inclusive community, then go on that. But as someone who wants an inclusive community, then I will accept that it can be expensive to build affordable housing. And I'm also very sorry that there aren't more people that work in affordable housing that have more knowledge about it. And so I'm going to reach out to them and hope that they start going to these meetings. I'm just, my heart is bleeding like crazy. It's very upsetting.
My whole life has been about affordable living and affordable housing, so I accept your response.
I don't think a single person here doesn't believe in affordable housing.
I know, there's
What
not.
we're doing is what's affordable and what is reckless spending of money that can be spent in other locations to produce a bigger amount of affordable housing.
And damaging the environment for everybody. No.
No.
It's an affordable housing commission when we recommended the site review.
She has a question.
I'm speaking for myself this time. My son and I, I'm Lyle Lansdale, my son and I own the property that borders the Crest Street site. This is a tree and density issue. Crest Street is already a dense neighborhood. There are 2-lane streets and numerous dead ends. And we love our trees, we love our shade. And the property that you're talking about, well, the most buildable part of the Crest Street property is, what do you call it? It's land bound. I mean, there's no access into it. And you will have to close an alley that has been on the books but never used. And there are trees, talk about age. There's a willow oak that's more than 36 inches in diameter that would have to be taken down, and 2 more that are, they've got to be over 100 years old, and several others in this alley. I mean, what we could, it would break my heart to see all of those trees go, including the clear cutting that you're talking about for the construction. What we really could use in Crest Street neighborhood is a nice little green space for the children to play and people to walk their dogs. And you know, if you wanted to develop the tiny space you've got that's developable, make it green space for people to walk in.
Still the next people who have permissions to speak. There's one more person up here. And then before we go, we need to ask one more question that was sent in. Hi. Are you just able to speak to whether this project is really feasible in terms of what is the chance that you could clear cut and then find out we can't go any further?
I can't speak to whether or not it's actually developable without a contract, which we did not provide, nor did we receive. And what was the second part? I'm sorry.
Just, is it possible that you could clear cut and then find that answer?
The clear cutting would not happen before finding out whether or not you could develop it.
do this again. I have a quick question. If you did not figure on the 25 for the storm, which is our land use ordinance plan right now, but on 50 or more likely 100, which will increase soon, given the way things are going, how significant would the change be in your plans, and how would it impact it?
Well, again, there are no plans, just showing.
I mean, in your engineering, what you're saying technically related to it.
We would provide the 100-year, if required, the 100-year pre-development flows, and if required by the town, the developer, whoever that ends up being, would have to match those flows for the 100-year storm.
So it would be prudent to figure out 100 at least, as we know it's probably going to increase. I want to say one other thing about affordability. I am for affordability. Spring Valley has some small houses that were meant to be, that were affordable when they were bought. I don't think this is an either-or question. It's more a question of anyone who moves into an affordable house in a situation like that is going to face the same stormwater issues and the same financial burdens perhaps that I have faced. I moved here because it was affordable. It's maybe not affordable for somebody to move in my house. It's not affordable to answer all the stormwater problems that we have. So affordability is a very broad thing, and we need to protect the vulnerable, but we also need to speak the truth in the next 4 years. So that's my...
The bridge at Bowling Creek is built for a 100-year storm, just as a reference point.
You see how high it is.
I have a quick question, and I'm going to pass it over to you. This is from another resident. Our knowledge of the report says our knowledge of the proposed development is limited in that grading information was not available. What does that mean?
It means no proposed grading was provided to us for the analysis.
And how did that hamper your analysis then?
Well, we didn't look at any post-development. We only provided the analysis on the regulations for the items that they would have to meet for development and in design.
Hi, you said you never did an analysis of the downstream impact, like into Spring Valley or into another neighborhood. Who is responsible for doing that, and how does that impact decisions that are made? Who pays for it?
To answer your question, I don't really know who's responsible for it. How does it happen? The responsible entity or someone who decides to pay for it to have it done hires an engineering firm, and they analyze a huge area around Carrboro for the drainage area that goes to that pond, and the runoff and floodplains are mapped from that study. It could be different types of engineering models are used, but that's how it would be completed.
Okay, so the Town of Carrboro is not responsible for doing downstream assessments, how this impacts.
I'm not sure. I can't answer that question. I'm sorry.
Well, can the town answer the question?
There's no one from the town here that can answer the question.
What department within the town would be responsible for addressing that?
I don't know that either, but it would be reviewed by town engineers. Planning and inspection.
Is there a chance that Summit could bid on the site plan as well as the eventual building plan?
We could, if it becomes a public bid, we'd have to go through the formal process again, same as we did here. And we are not contractors, we do not build anything, so it would just be.
I just want to address what the tenor of the meeting that I tried to express at the beginning, that this is not about not caring about affordability or affordable housing. There are a lot of things that go into a healthy community, like clean air, clean water, breathability. And I'm going to use a term that is hard for me to, but I am really offended that anytime it is brought up that we think about things outside of a small, narrow thing, that it's a NIMBYism thing, or the other side wants to pimp poverty in order to make a point. It is not a healthy community if we do not have clean air, clean water, and have livable streets. That isn't good for people who need affordable housing or people who live in McMansions. If we have a bad housing plan here, that's a separate conversation, and maybe that is something that needs to happen. I would like to ask the housing person, though, is this project going to be rental property or purchase property? Because I think we don't know that.
Yeah, thank you for giving me that opportunity. This study was only done so that we had an idea of the state of the properties and what may or may not be feasible. There are no plans, there's no decision by council to move forward at all. And you all will certainly have, as this progresses, you will have certainly plenty of opportunities to engage with council on that.
Well, the reason I asked that was about wealth building, because if we are concerned about diversity and inclusivity, more rental property is not necessarily going to bring that about. So to create this in the name of affordable housing and not have a real plan of whether or not this is wealth building, really brings diversity, to me seems like a very inappropriate use of precious land that we know has value for other things besides housing.
So the public will be very involved in determining what, if this project goes forward, what that community would look like, and things like that that you raised is a wonderful question about wealth building. So I think all of these conversations will come in at that stage.
Are we going to have a chance? Are we going to have a chance to meet in a forum like this with council to talk about the feasibility of
We can
this?
see where we go. Right now, staff is still reviewing the report, and then we need to meet the summit to finalize the report at that point. So again, I can't speculate because I don't know if this will be going forward or not. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, then they talk about
Okay, so we have 5 more minutes. I know that you have been waiting, so I'm going to pass the mic to you.
How much did the report cost?
$90,136.
Thank you for everyone's input so far. I am here as a resident of Carrboro, but also as a real estate agent, and bring a different perspective that I wanted to share, and I think there's some pieces missing in the presentation. So currently on a lending side, so say for example, you're a homeowner going to sell your property, they're looking at a 100-year floodplain. So all of the homes that are along this creek will now have issues of getting a buyer if it is not managed. So I think these are some of the perspectives when you're looking site visit or site specific, you're missing the impact to the other areas around it. And I think that's really important, that we need to bring in other eyes and ears to share those additional impacts. So I know you guys are a lot of neighbors, but I have concerns about the viability of ongoing and what the community looks like in retaining the value that these individuals have gained over these years. We don't want to lose that. Yes, we want affordable housing, but is this the right location? So I've done a lot of research. There are so many programs out there that are available that I don't think the city has leveraged. Like there's commercial properties. They are now bringing so many programs to local communities to say, hey, if you have a vacant commercial property, we're willing to give those owners discounts to build it out and make affordable housing. Okay, that's an existing building, much cheaper, gives tax breaks to the landowner, and oh, by the way, boom, we can turn it around much faster. So I want to make sure that we're also looking at opportunities like that. So we're deep diving on site-specific things. That's important, but I also think we need to take a step back and say we're spending so much money on a project that might not even be viable. So is it a feasibility study that's needed to just say these units are going to be $500,000 a piece? Oh, okay, that's not affordable for a purchase, and even rent, how would that be manageable? So I just wanted to give more of a bigger picture and a real estate perspective.
All right, we have 1 minute left. Can someone speak in 1 minute or less? And then we gotta hustle out of here.
I was just going to say, like you said, November 19th sounds really important for, I mean, everybody's so well-spoken, so intelligent in here. It seems like we do need to kind of restore some old Carrboro in the sense that it was an idealist place where, you know, there might be some way to talk to town council and not be pitted against each other, not be pitted against some concept that nobody even appears to want. Even what she said, it's just another quality of life issue. It's all the same interest, you know. It's all an interest of quality of life. So it just seems like we should definitely continue talking and trying to slow down a process nobody seems to think is very wise, you know.
All right. I'm sorry?
I was just saying, when we leave here, I'll hang around and answer any other questions.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, if anyone has a burning question that we couldn't get to today, please email me with that question and we'll get those answers to you. All right. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.